So yeah, go ahead and type your questions into the chat. We'll get to them. If I miss anything, Bernard can keep me honest.
Yes,
Help me
yeah,
out.
we have a few there already, I think.
We do, great. Also, if people want to ask their question out loud, they're most certainly welcome to do so. You can raise your hand by going into the participants tab, and there's a little raise hand button, and Bernard will be monitoring that as well. So I'm going to start off with a question from me. Since post-AC or post-AC?
Post-AC.
Post-AC. Since post-AC is a commercial product, we would hope our university would pay for it, but are there plans for non-affiliated peoples to pay for, say, a subscription?
Yeah, so the link at the end of the slide deck is to our new product, which will be in individual subscription. And there will be some sort of free subscription model built into that. Unfortunately, as I said, data itself is really expensive. Otherwise, we would have just done this as a research project and made it freely available for everyone, but it has to support itself. So that subscription product will be in beta later in the year, and we're really hoping to launch that formally at the end of the year. So it's just a few technical connections to fix up first.
Sure, of course.
It'll be a low-cost subscription. We're very aware that people are on low incomes and every dollar counts. And one of the reasons we headed for universities to pay for things is that we're really as committed as we can to the people who need it to get access at it at the lowest cost.
Of course. I have a question from Diane Triani. How easy is it for international students to get a work permit in Australia? And are many companies happy to sponsor visas? Many non-academic jobs specifically ask for Australian citizenship or PR.
Yep, and that is a very common barrier to entry in the Australian market. When they ask for Australian citizenship, what they sometimes are asking for is a right to work. So it's always worth ringing up and saying, if you have a visa that enables you to work after you've finished, and there are some visa types like that, so you might have a 4-year right to work, it's worth ringing the hiring manager to say that you have a right to work, and they don't have to sponsor you if it's a short-term contract, or they can try you out for 3 years and you can see how you go. So it's always worth making the call. The more insidious kind of barriers are exactly what you're saying. I think someone else said further down, maybe I saw that, about security clearances. Now, they ask even very simple security clearances. If you're not PR or don't have citizenship, these are very difficult to acquire. And sometimes they're put in there as a kind of way to, and many government jobs are like that. And so you are pretty locked out of that market in lots of cases. So the visa complications are real and difficult. I think the bigger problem, however, is racism. And it's very evident. There's plenty of research to support that the same CV with different names on it will be received very differently. Women face this too, but racism is worse than sexism, in my opinion, in the job market from looking at all the research. So I'm sorry that that's the case. I think being aware of it and not blaming yourself is important.
Just to confirm that, I mean, that is a very important point. I want to reiterate that to everyone who has experienced some form of discrimination, because it happens. I mean, I can tell from my own experience, I am sort of in the disability category, physical disability, and it happens there as well. So don't blame yourself. That's the way victimization starts. So don't do that. Be aware of it. Be aware of it.
Well said.
So thanks very much for that, Inge.
Of course. Can I pick up Tian's question here?
Please, would you like me to read it for you?
I can pull it out. I just discovered the chat tab. I just read the scroll back. So you say that some companies use agents and do not directly interact with candidates to the interview stage. That is true. There's also a lot of machine learning in reading resumes and sorting because there's just so many applications. The government makes this worse. So the government in their job seeker, forcing people to apply for multiple jobs has actually become an active problem for companies. In fact, I think they wish the government wouldn't do that. So now they've got to have some filtering arrangements on some jobs, which is again why I say the networking to get the job before it gets advertised is highly effective. It takes a lot of investment and commitment, but it's much more effective. What's more likely to happen, though, in the type of jobs that we're talking about here is that they're hard to find people to do them. So this is good news for you. You have rare and valuable skills. So sometimes these jobs are placed with recruiters, which is why I mentioned the recruiters in my presentation as potentially a problem. The lack of knowledge of the PhD, the lack of knowledge of the postdoc needs to be factored into how you're interacting with these people. Yeah, there's huge potential in setting up your own agency. If I lost my job tomorrow, that would be the second thing I'd do. I often get calls from people who are looking for researchers because I'm visible, I've got a public profile. So someone will ring me up and say, I need someone with a specialism in agricultural drones and data imaging. Do you know someone? And I can usually bounce around inside my institutions and on Twitter and so on to try and connect these people. I don't take a fee like most recruiters would take a fee of $15,000 to do something like that. So it actually could be quite lucrative for people who are considering it. If it's in your mind, get in touch with me. I'd love to talk to you. We need more people to be doing this. And I think we also need maybe a little bit of bridging and a little bit more education about self-presentation and anticipating these barriers. But great question. And
I will also
your market.
I will interject and say, for an advertising point of view, we also have a panel on networking. I believe it is the next panel, so next Wednesday, I think, is the networking panel. So stay tuned for that too.
Yeah,
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Thing is saying if research is not a good search term, what's the keyword to use? So yeah, obviously data science has become a really popular job category and it's massively under stocked at the moment. So people are desperate for good data scientists. I think if that's something that appeals, many of you could probably walk out right now into something role like that and they pay pretty well. Look for words, like I said, like analyst. Don't look for the word like researcher. Analyst seems like the key word. Type in analyst and then, big data and then the location where you want to work and see what comes up. I bet you'll get stacks. Even now, we saw that in that graph where I'm starting to graph that there is a drop in the current market, but I think it's not as big or as a steep a drop as it is in lower paid industries like hospitality or tourism. We're not as exposed to that. Alan's asking, is a future potential expansion? Would you consider adding internships to the post-doc database? Yeah, one thing that we're thinking about doing is adding recruiters in so that you can elect to be matched and that you provide data so that we can sort of automate that experience that comes through me normally, so that people can go in and you can enter keywords about what sort of work you're interested in and you become, kind of like a stable of elite performers. And that's why we're really hoping, we were hoping maybe that kind of model could create a free product for you because you're valuable, like your eyeballs and your talents are really sought after. So you're valuable there. Thanks for the feedback, James. Good to see you here. Manadeep's asking, what could or should faculty be doing to better prepare ECRs for non-academic jobs? Great question, thank you. Please stop telling people this is business as usual, but worse. It's not. Please stop your colleagues, because I've got the people in here aren't doing that. It's the people who don't bother turning up to anything like this that are probably the problem. So there is I got published in the Times Higher Ed today, and it's the hugest clickbait title that says something like, Thesis Whisperer calls out grooming of, and I'm like, I should never have used that word with the journalist. Of course they put it in the headline, but what I was trying to say there is that there was an article in the Times a little while back that said, PhDs are victims of their own magical thinking and they just think they're exceptional and that they've got past all these barriers and they'll continue to get past them. My point in that article when I was interviewed was to say, there's reasons why we think that. We have succeeded. And we do feel, we are told we're really good because we are. But in a broken job market, it's broken at the moment. It's broken now. It'll be broken next year. After that, we'll see. So I think you need to plan for 18 months of disruption. That means if you've got a job that goes that long, good for you. I'd still be actively looking next year just in case we continue into a third year where it's terrible. But for those of you who are entering, it's deeply troubling at the moment. Now, there are some disciplines that are better than others in accepting people to go away for a time and come back. I know biological science isn't really into it. Chemistry isn't really into it. I don't know about astrophysics, but maybe academia won't be able to afford to be so picky because people will just have to go their own way. So I think understanding that, to come back to the supervisor mentor point of view, understanding that's what we're facing, and acknowledging that we don't know and we don't know what will happen, and the giving advice that's worked at other times. If you ever get tempted to give that advice, just make sure you say with it, but if you don't succeed, this isn't your fault because this is broken. And I would also be worried about people encouraging people to pursue these normal markers of academic success and actually wasting time hanging on in an industry which isn't going to support them. They'd be better off seeking opportunities elsewhere. There's hard discussions for those to have. There's a private one here, so I won't say who's asking me this question. But many of us still hope for a postdoc position at the end of our PhDs, absolutely, despite discouraging statistics, sure. I'm very focused on my research. I'm currently 1.5 years into my PhD. I can see myself reaching the end of my PhD and realising I have to consider, what should I be doing now to prepare myself in terms of getting non-academic skills? How can I fit this into my PhD while still working on the papers? I'm not aware of support for this from ANU. There's actually a lot of support if you're an ANU. So, hey, email me if you haven't been shown it, because there's a lot. Now, I think this halfway through PhD is a really tricky position to be in, right? Because if my predictions, my optimistic prediction is the end of next year, if there's a vaccine, we'll start to see difference. So it might be that you're just sheltered while you do your PhD and you're going to emerge into a job market, which actually a lot of people have vacated. So that's entirely possible. I'm not going to rule it out. I think you're smart to say, what else can I do? And so I would say, aside from technical skills, which you are developing anyway, I'm not actually worried about you. Other disciplines aren't so technologically focused and you have to be, so you've got those. The thing I would say would be start talking to people in other sectors. Start doing some of the commercialization training. Start just being aware and open. Seek out internships. This won't hurt your academic career. It shouldn't take too much time away from it. You should still be able to get your work done. And just make sure that you create opportunities, because what's often called luck is preparation meeting an opportunity, right? So if you're open to it, and the very best way I think is to look at the APR intern page and see if you're eligible for any of those. They tend to leave them until really late stage candidature, which isn't super helpful in my view. But the other thing is to just get by that navigating a pathway to industry, because I'm telling you, the networking techniques in that, they also work in academia. Academia is all about the networking. And I think if you apply those within academic settings or non-academic settings, you're not going to lose. And yes, if you're at ANU, please come see me, because maybe you're not getting the newsletters you should be getting, because there's plenty. Roni's saying, any tips on networking during the pandemic? Now that many networking sessions and talks have turned into non-interactive webinars, great question. The first thing I would say is that networking doesn't have to be in a crowd. The best networking is done one-on-one. And the Leaving Academia book that's about to come out made a really interesting point about this. He talks about, you know, finding an industry you're interested in, using LinkedIn or something like that to literally stalk people, find them, send them a message, ask them for an informational interview. And the informational interview, all that's meant to happen is that you're meant to ask them about their job. You're not asking for a job, you're asking them about their job. And the logic behind this is that they remember that they've had an interesting conversation with a person. And down the track, it's the people that they know that are probably going to give you the job. And this is exactly what he tracks in Leaving Academia as well. So there's a paper, interesting paper on employment from the 1980s that is called The Strength of Weak Ties. And I wrote about it in an academic context earlier this year in a blog post called Academic Spy Networks. And this paper, so there's a link to the paper there. This paper says that the people who do the best in the job market, they don't just mobilize their inner contacts. What they do is that those inner contacts reach a second order contact. So it's the person that they talk to who's going to have the opportunities and have the contacts that will help you. So in LinkedIn, the idea, the premise behind this is to approach someone kind of cold and then see if they'll talk to you, and just talk to them about what their job is, and with the spirit of, I'm not asking for your job, I'm just interested. And then the hope from that is that they will then remember you and recommend you on to a second order contact to have a talk to. In fact, you can just ask them at the end of the talk, who else would you recommend I talk to? That kind of incremental face-to-face or via Zoom kind of coffee chats, they're the sort of things that will get you a lot further. And of course, webinars and academic conferences are not going to be the kind of job hunting places they used to be. So I would still take this approach if I was academic job hunting, and I have in the past. In fact, I've never got a job through answering a job ad, which is an irony in my line of research. Okay, I'm nearly 50 and I've got all my jobs through networking, including the one that I've got right now, where they made the job for me. It was advertised, but they already knew they wanted me. And that happens all the time in academia. You think it doesn't? It does. I've blared on about that. Tips to networking, I hope that it's just such a huge bunch of social and different skills. You need to be brave, I think, too. So good luck with that. Astro isn't friendly to people coming in and out of the industry. Good to know. Some of us have to eat and pay the rent. So it just comes to a point where maybe we have constrained life choices. I did graduate in a recession myself, so I have deep sympathy with what's happening now. So I graduated in the early 90s recession with an architecture degree with a decimated building industry. So I know exactly what you're going through. It's tough. I did manage to make a living. It was hard. And I did stay attached to it. And actually, when the good times returned, that's when I left it. So go figure, life takes you in odd directions. Maybe Astro will have to be a little bit more open if so many talented people have left. I know a PhD student, says Natalia, who was discouraged by their supervisors to take on an industry job and earn some extra while doing their PhD. They refused to give her a reference. But I've also heard the exact opposite story. Yep, so supervisors are very different. You know, if your actual direct supervisor won't give you a reference, it's always worth approaching other more friendly members of faculty to see if someone else can give you a boost. Of course, add me to LinkedIn. Anyone can add me to LinkedIn, but particularly you, James, absolutely. Should training regarding the non-academic jobs be made mandatory in the supervisor training module? Various universities already have. Well, my answer to that would be yes, but I think that would be controversial and I'm not sure people would want to do it, and I don't have any control over it. I stand ready to help people because I think it's a really hard position to be in as a supervisor. I've had students myself and they've been graduating into a terrible humanities job market. Yours is bad, theirs is worse. None of them have got academic jobs. It's just, and it puts you at a really difficult position to know what to advise. Luckily, I specialise in it, so at least I can talk data, and I've got an interest in the strategies that many people don't develop these skills, which is why hopefully I'll keep my job. I mean, every academic should be worried about their job at the moment. I'm 92% certain I'll be okay today, but who knows what the future holds. Anushu, sorry if I got that wrong. Anshu. So thank you for that question. Another private question. Any tips on how the advice might differ for more seasoned postdocs who are already looking for a faculty position? I suspect we look less attractive in the market than a fresh graduate or younger person. It's really hard to say with that. Actually, the research started off with looking at the academic job market, and what we found there was really interesting, and it's worth reading the paper that I linked through on one of the first couple of slides. So we explored academic job ads, and we found, of course, that people really want experience, particularly team management, ability to write grants and so on, that younger people wouldn't have. Consider that people are losing their jobs all over the place at the moment. So far, this hasn't happened to academics as much as it's happened to our professional colleagues, but it will come. People will be losing their jobs, and there will be a lot of experienced academics on the market competing for some of these jobs. And I wouldn't rule them out of the race. So I have given various workshops, including some of the stuff that I showed you today, to postdocs who are 14 or 15 years in, who've wanted to get out and have made really successful transitions. So I think that the more experience that you have with managing people, and also a technical grip on things and project management, and able to demonstrate a depth of experience. I actually think it's the other way around. I think younger people struggle more, but it really depends on the team. You know, someone might want someone they can mold or tell what to do more easily, or that's the assumption they have when they have a young person. So it's a good question, and I don't know the real answer to it, but ageism also real. Racism, sexism, they're all real. Tips for creating an effective LinkedIn. So this is where I don't exactly practice what I preach, but I try. So there are plenty of articles on how to write good LinkedIn bios. I've tried to do this with my bio and then reverted back to mine. So I think the best tip is to look at it, identify the industries you're interested in, look at how people present themselves there and just copy it. There's a design principle called most advanced yet acceptable, which means it's good to look creative and interesting, but it's bad to look completely different from other people. And so I think that principle works in terms of creating a LinkedIn bio. I think it's worth getting a professional headshot. I got one done finally. Didn't cost me that much, looks great. And then you're always looking your best, whatever platform you share it on. Having a good 1-page or 2-page resume, easily downloadable, and testimonials, right? So if you looked on my LinkedIn, I've recently been just asking people for testimonials because I'm going for a professorship. It's nauseating doing that, like writing through people going, so hey girl, hey, how about writing me a testimonial? It's just like, but people have done that and they've done lovely ones. And that's then visible to everybody. And then I cut and paste them out into my promotion application, but they're there forever. So I think testimonials are really a cheap way for people to show you appreciation, and they make a huge difference. And not many people do them. So I would encourage you to get onto that. Good question. Thank you. Shivani says, do you think there'll be more advertisements this year for domestic or international jobs? Yeah, it's really hard to say. Most universities are still in some sort of hiring freeze. Most of them are still trying to calculate the impact on their budget. A lot of them are really worried about 2021. The smart ones are worried about 2022. So I would not see the academic job market, as I said, recovering within the next 18 months. This is not a question of vaccine and it all gets back to normal. But the big question I have in my mind is, what is the government going to do? So far from the way I see it, I'm just going to not sugarcoat it. What I think they do is go, oh, I'm not going to do anything about that, and I'll come back in when there's smoking ruins and see if I can remake it in the way I want it to be, which with our current government is neoliberal, corporatized, industry sponsored, not super critical, all those things. Like, I might be being cynical, but this is how I see the government at the moment. There are rumours that we'll have an election next August. I'm involved in politics to some extent here, just by nature of being a citizen of the ACT. It seeps into your bones. If we have an election next August, that's going to be really interesting. What will the Labor Party do? We are so dependent on government funding here. So international jobs, again, it's really going to depend on each country's grappling with the virus and what happens there. I think there's so many unknowns. I would just bank on it being terrible for 18 months and make plans. So how are you going to survive for 18 months? Have you got a job to cover that period? If you haven't, what's your backup plan? How much savings has you got? Can you wait it out? Do you want to wait it out? Do you have someone who can support you? Can you go back and live somewhere else? How much are you prepared to sacrifice to wait it out? These are all questions that only you can answer. There's much discrimination against PhD students who take a long time to finish, Teresa's saying, in either academia or industry. Question. I'm part-time, also working part-time, and I've been doing that since first year undergraduate. Good for you, Teresa. You know what the research shows us is that you're exactly the person who's more likely to have a job than anyone else. It's absolutely shown that a person who has a job before they finish their PhD is much more likely to have a job after it and immediately after it. Yes, I have encountered people who raise questions about people taking a long time to do their PhD, but if you're officially part-time, that's not an issue. Just put the elapsed number of years, and just, your work experience is just as valuable, if not more so, in these times. So yeah, there's discrimination. I'm more worried about racism, ableism, sexism than I am about that. I think you're doing the right thing, and I myself am very much of the same. I suppose I think you're You're right, because that's the way I did as well. I always worked, and I worked all through my PhD as well. So I think that industry experience makes you a really strong contender. Christian says academia doesn't normally notice PhD times. Yeah, and that's true. I mean, what's normal is just out the window at ANU. Very common, very, very common to be more than 5 years. Extremely common. So common, it's worryingly common. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. Any other questions? 2 minutes before the hour. Might have tapped you out at just the right time. What do you think, Nicole?
Let's stick around and see if anybody has a couple more questions.
These are great questions, by the way.
Yeah, it's been great.
Testing me out.
Yeah, I will note that we'll make your slides available and this recording available as well to everyone who's attended. I have another question.
How to make universities take notice of these problems and help students and supervisors? Also great question. So as part of the commercialisation process, we had to interview 100 university administrators. I found that deeply depressing. I'm just going to speak at the aggregate level. I'm not going to point a finger at any one VC that I talked to or any one dean, but I talked to a lot. And the thing that I came away with from that, which has always occupied my mind, is they're not that worried about you. And they're not that worried about you for a couple of reasons. They know that you're highly skilled and that you have a very low unemployment rate anyway. So they know that doing a PhD is generally a big financial, statistically, a big financial benefit to people, and that they have low unemployment. They are much more focused on the undergraduate picture, also because it's measured. Increasingly governments have put a focus on measuring employment outcomes as a success factor for universities and geared funding around that, or moved or threatened it if they haven't actually done it. So they're very interested in employability, but they've got to keep their eye on who's the biggest group of students who I have to keep an eye on. That's undergraduates. After that, there's masters, because those people talk to each other and sorry, my son's having a conversation. So working at home, son and his best friend having a loud conversation the whole way. Where was I at? So it's a numbers game. So I think the reason that you don't get much attention is that you actually are a big problem, and you're self-sufficient and you're highly skilled and you're highly sought after. So I think in many universities' minds, they can just sort of put you low down on the list of priorities. I'm not happy about that, which is why I try to do something. I think this is one of the most pressing problems that we have is wasted human talent and people suffering because they can't get into a job that they love, and we spend so much time and effort developing ourselves as people. So there's a question of a human to human. I'm sure most vice chancellors and deans, human to human, really care about you, but when you become a number, they've got other priorities. I wish it was different. So how to make them take notice? Talk to them, email them, tell them you want, be noisy. That's the only way you get anything. But I wouldn't expect to get a lot of attention from them at this point in time. Do you think there's underemployment for PhDs? It's really hard to say. I've looked at the numbers from the ABS, and the unemployment was higher than I would have anticipated from the census data, but it's really hard to say. That's such a snapshot in time. I don't think it's reliable, and most indices don't separate out PhD from other postgrads, if they even separate out postgrad from undergrad or any other type of educational attainment. So it's really hard to say. I don't think there's so much underemployment, but I think there's employment mismatch of people who are trained for one thing and not able to do that, and then not able to find another job that really uses their skill set and would be interesting. I think that's probably more of a problem than actual unemployment. And also underemployment, not having enough work. But thanks for the questions.
I had another question about, you had some data about people who come for a PhD in Australia and then leave with their PhD to go find another job somewhere else. Can you expand on that a little bit more? Is there data on people who come to Australia to get PhD with the idea of leaving, or is it more of a something that is just kind of necessary, that they can't find a job here and so they leave?
There's not very good data on that, so I can't answer from a data point of view. All I've got is anecdotes from dealing with thousands and thousands of PhD students. And I would say that many people, particularly in your kind of field, are interested in moving overseas for the opportunities that it presents. So your field in particular has very specialised equipment, very specialised teams, very expensive facilities, and very strong international networks compared to others. So there's a lot of international flow in your area that is opportunistic, and as it should be, talented people going and working with other talented people, doing important work in interesting places. I think there's nothing wrong with that. So I'd imagine that will still go on, and there are still lots of potential there. In other areas and discipline clusters, it's much less clear. And some people come to Australia to study for a PhD who already have a job promised to them back home. Lots of people I meet like that. I'm always jealous. I'm like, oh yeah, I just have to finish this thing, and then I go home and I kind of pay it back by working for 5 years for a particular university. And they always say with this kind of like, I have to go. And all the local students are like, oh my God, you know. So look, it's horses for courses. I'm sure that's problematic in its own way too. So I think that question is complicated and hard to answer definitively, and we don't measure it very well. Yeah.
It is hard to measure. Is there any other questions that anyone has? Go ahead and type it into the chat or raise your hand.
I don't think the underemployment question has been answered.
Yes.
Do you think there's underemployment? Yeah, I do. I think there's massive underemployment, and there has been for a very long time, maybe 2 decades. Because casual teaching positions are paid by the hour. Many people start, if they're not doing a postdoc, they're trying to make a living doing casual teaching. So this might not be as true in astrophysics as it is in other places. But so literature, philosophy, those departments are pretty much run on postdocs, run on casual teaching. And many of those people have lost their jobs altogether in semester 2 and maybe don't have much hope of being employed in semester 3. It's devastating. So underemployment, yes, a huge problem. I think less so for your sector from what I observe, but again, there's no real hard data on that. I think people hang on to the academic dream for a long time. I know I did. And I know I was enabled to do that in many ways, including that I had a partner who was supportive, who I could earn $30,000 a year for 7 years in a row, and he would pay my rent and put food in my mouth. And I had a child, you know. So I think that there's privilege in this equation. Some people do start closer to the finish line than others. Some people will be in a position to tough it out because they've got that family support or whatever, or private wealth. Whereas other people won't, and that's not fair. And I think that's, for a sector like us, which prides itself on being a meritocracy and the best person gets a job, it's shameful, but has been like that for a long time. It's a depressing question to end on, but thank you for asking it. Okay, well, sorry to leave it on such a Debbie Downer. I really wish you all the best. If it's any consolation, I'm not really that worried about you. You've got so many great talents and skills. I'm sad if you don't get to pursue your dream, because I'd love every astrophysicist to be looking at the stars, but I really hope that I've helped in some little way.
Thanks so much, Inger. So that about wraps it up for this session this week. I will note that next week we're going to be talking about maintaining mental health and productivity, and it's going to be a huge panel. Huge. It's going to be 5 people, and it's going to be moderated by Tintin and Anshu and me. So we hope to see you there. Yeah, have a good week, everyone.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. See you all.
Yeah. Thank you. It's great. You're getting a great round of applause in the chat.
Loving that.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. See you soon.